If you're an IT security pro, the world of operational technology can feel like a whole different planet. For years, right, securing the plant floor was somebody else's problem. Well, not anymore. Today, we're diving deep into the massive challenge of OT asset inventory, why it's suddenly a mandate, why it's such a complete mess, and the actual methods you can use to get a handle on it. Let's get right into it. This is one of the oldest and truest sayings in all of cybersecurity, and it perfectly captures the problem we're talking about. It's pretty simple. If you don't know what's on your network, you have absolutely zero chance of defending it. And in the world of OT, there's a whole lot you can't see. So why the big rush all of a sudden? It's because asset inventory has officially gone from being a nice-to-have best practice to a you must do this requirement. This isn't just about good security hygiene anymore. It's about the law. And what you've got to understand here is the sheer power behind this move. This wasn't just one agency sending out a memo. No, this was a unified front from CISA, the EPA, the NSA, the FBI, and a bunch of international partners. They all came together and basically said, from now on, OT asset inventory is the foundation for protecting critical infrastructure, period. And they got super specific. This isn't just counting devices. They're demanding a continuously updated inventory, a whole taxonomy to classify everything, and get this, tracking 14 specific attributes for every single asset. We're talking IP address, manufacturer, firmware version, you name it. The bottom line here is crystal clear. Your old spreadsheet just isn't going to cut it, not even close. And hey, don't think this is just a US thing. Over in Europe, the NIS2 directive is coming down just as hard, and it affects a huge number of organizations, even companies in the supply chain of businesses in the EU. The message from regulators everywhere is the same. We are serious, and this new directive absolutely has teeth. So, how sharp are those teeth? Well, for what they call essential entities, not complying can hit you with a penalty of up to 10 million euros or 2% of your total annual earnings, whichever number is higher. Believe me, when the fines get that big, you know the game has completely changed. Okay, so the mandate is loud and clear, but why is this so difficult to begin with? Well, that takes us to the visibility gap, or what I like to call the absolute mess on the modern plant floor. I love this quote I saw from a user on Reddit because it just hits the nail on the head. Anyone out there who has ever tried to manage even just a few hundred devices with a spreadsheet knows this pain. It's a logistical nightmare, and it's just completely unsustainable for this kind of environment. And this diagram here really illustrates the core technical problem. The old Purdue model, it was built on this idea of a clean separation, a so-called air gap between your IT world and your OT world. But that gap, it's gone. These networks are converging, and your standard IT security tools, they just can't see what's happening below that industrial firewall. It leaves this massive blind spot where your most critical and, honestly, your most fragile assets are running. And if you dig in, it gets even messier. The plant floor is practically a museum of technology. I'm talking about systems that are 20, 30 years old, devices still running Windows XP with SMBv1 enabled, default credentials that nobody ever bothered to change, undocumented remote access ports that some vendors set up years ago. A manual inventory is out of date the second you finish it, and even worse, it gives you zero context for how all these things are actually talking to each other. Okay, so we've covered the why and the what. Now let's get into the how. When you're trying to actually find all these mystery assets, you've really got two main methods. And it's a debate with some very real and sometimes costly consequences. On one side, you've got active scanning. This is where you directly poke and prod devices to ask them what they are. It's fast, you can get a ton of detail, but, and it's a big but, you run the very real risk of knocking over some of that old, fragile OT equipment. On the other side, there's passive monitoring. This is way safer. You just listen to the network traffic like an eavesdropper. The downside? You might miss devices that don't talk very often, and how much you see depends entirely on where you put your sensors. And here's that same practitioner from Reddit again, and this just perfectly captures the reality on the ground. He's saying, look, with carefully crafted custom and map scripts, he's never had a problem. But then he immediately adds, this is not an advice. And that's the key, right? It's a calculated risk. For every person who pulls it off, there's another with a horror story about taking down a whole production line. And for the passive approach, this diagram shows the major catch. See, if you only put your sensor up at the aggregation layer, so you're only seeing the north-south traffic going in and out of that production cell, you completely miss all the east-west chatter between the devices inside the cell. And that's often where the most critical control commands live. To actually see everything, you have to get your visibility right down at the cell level. Which brings us to our final and, honestly, most crucial point. Getting a complete asset inventory is not the finish line, not even close. It's the starting block. The real reason we do all this work, the end goal, is to build a truly defensible network through segmentation. Frameworks like NIST give us the basic roadmap. It makes sense, right? You figure out what you have, you pick the right security controls, you implement them, and then you check your work. But look at that very first step, categorize. You can't do anything else on this list until you've done step 1. It's the foundation for everything that follows. Now, the gold standard for segmenting OT networks is a framework called IEC 62443, and it's all built around this really smart idea of zones and conduits. You basically group assets that have similar security needs into a zone, and then you strictly control the communication paths, the conduits, that connect to those zones. This is how you contain a threat and stop it from spreading all over your plant. And this is where it all comes together. Once you have that complete visibility from your inventory, you can literally draw these zones on a network map. You can see exactly which devices are in cell 1, which are in cell 2, and most importantly, you can see precisely how they're talking to each other. With that map in hand, you can finally build and enforce real security policies. You can create a rule that says, this engineering workstation is allowed to talk to these specific PLCs over in cell 2, and absolutely nothing else. You're building digital bulkheads. So now, if one zone gets breached, the damage is contained. This right here, this is what a defensible OT network actually looks like. So we'll end with this question for you. Getting that inventory is the mandatory first step. It's the hard part, and now it's a regulatory requirement. But the real question you need to be asking yourself is, what are you going to do with it? An inventory tells you what you have. Segmentation is how you actually defend it.